Okay, welcome to our discussion of feminism. Now, feminism, we're going to look at it in terms of as a form of virtue ethics, primarily due to one of the predominant forms of feminist ethics known as ethics of care. Now, in order to kind of get the idea of get an idea of how to approach the ethics of care, we need to first understand a little bit more about feminism itself. Feminism, as a general thesis, holds that the experience of women has been left out in Western ethical traditions. It's been left out in the following ways. First, traditional Western ethical traditions, namely the ones that we've studied thus far, deny the role of the private life. So, for example, questions about partiality or special relationships, emotions, these things are left out and are classically defined as being feminine. Whereas the raising of the public life has been something that we've seen throughout our history. So ideas such as impartiality or fairness, equality, reason, things that we may consider to be masculine in nature, are raised, they're praised. They're things which ultimately are supported. This has been supported because of patriarchy. That is, that it's come to exist within our society that male power has been exalted, whereas female power has been subjugated. This is a problem, according to feminism, because it excludes many individuals, over half of our human population, from being appropriately involved and invited into discussions that are important to life, to the good life, to politics, to family, to society in general. And furthermore, ideas about masculinity and femininity have become fixed through time. That is, that masculinity and femininity as social ideas. Again, we're going to argue here that gender is a social construction. It's not related to your biological sex, but instead it's something that has become dominant or become created through a long experience of patriarchy. So certain features, certain ideas, certain character traits, certain values, again, have been exalted at the expense of others. Now, feminism has had three major waves, so to speak. The first wave began in 1848, really in Seneca Falls, New York, where a conference was held that ultimately ended up changing quite a bit with regards to how women were treated legally. The first wave of feminism focused much more on women's rights of self-determination, inheritance, property, and child-raising rights, including suffrage as well, and included suffrage, that is, as well. So the first wave of feminism focused a lot on political rights and legal rights. This really ended in roughly 1920, when women in America got the constitutional right to vote. Second wave feminism began after World War II and lasted through approximately 1970. In second wave feminism, the focus was on creating an equal opportunity society without sexual or gender-based discrimination. At this time, the differentiation between sex and gender, in terms of the sociological and biological constructs, became more prevalent. There were many arguments with regards to equal right and access. Third wave feminism is where we remain today. Its focus is on eliminating all gender discrimination. In particular, attention is given to specific issues related to things such as women's health, economy, racism, classism, and so forth. Now, feminism as a general movement has grown over time and now focuses not just on feminist or women's rights, but on many other things as well. Now, you may remember the case of Hines from your midterm. Again, from here. A woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to produce. He paid $20,000 for the radium and charged $200,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Hines, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $100,000, which is half of what it cost. Hines excluded all other possible ways, legal and illegal, to get the remaining money. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I've discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." The question to you was, should Hines break into the laboratory to steal the drug for his wife? Now, the reason why I asked this question on the midterm comes back to the idea of moral psychology. Lawrence Kohlberg is a moral psychologist who utilized that case to try to determine where people were in terms of their moral development. Kohlberg developed this chart. He argued that at level 1, or pre-conventional morality, that an initial focus in terms of moral development would be on obedience and punishment. So a person would ask how they could avoid punishment. This would later transform into self-interest, or what's in it for me. In terms of conventional morality, which is where he believed most people were, people would begin to ask about interpersonal accord and conformity. So they would appeal to social norms and to being, quote, a good boy or a good girl. In the stage 4, people would enter into a law and order morality, where they would focus on developing and maintaining authority and social order. Kohlberg believed at the highest levels of moral development that we entered into what he called post-conventional morality. This involved either the development and utilization of a social contract orientation or to universal ethical principles, which he termed the principle of conscience. Now, it's interesting to note as well that this later level of his theory here seems to be remarkably Kantian in nature, but we won't be going into too much detail on that. The reason why we bring this up is because one of his research assistants, Carol Gilligan, argued that ultimately this attempt to understand ethics in this way was incomplete. Gilligan argued that traditional morality is oriented in a in a justice perspective. In a justice perspective, the agent is at a place socially and bases all moral verdicts on ideas of equality. That is, that we've divorced the human from society and traditional morality. Gilligan argues instead that we should put the agent back into social relationships, back into reality, and to look at how our relationships and the way in which we respond to need and perceptions of need is critical to developing ethically. She believed that this was something that is more found within feminine responses to ethical situations than in masculine responses. With Carol Gilligan's book, In a Different Voice, the idea of care became a dominant feature of feminist ethics. And it's argued that that care is fundamental to moral phenomena. But how do we define care? Caring for involves liking or being attached or attracted to the thing or person in question. Having care of involves being in a position in which care has been entrusted to you. And caring about involves being invested in that thing or person and holding it as important as oneself. It can be personal or impersonal in nature. And the breadth and degree of caring about can also vary. When we think about this, care seems to be very, very similar to the virtues that we've discussed within virtue theory. So if we understand care as a virtue, we can understand maybe an intellectual component in the following way. Caring about persons involves recognizing the capacity to recognize when those cared about are in need, as well as knowing what is good in that situation. The affective component of caring about involves being disposed to feel pleasure in response to successes and pain in response to failures. And the motivational and behavioral component of caring about involves a non-self-interested desire to help based out of a direct regard for the other person's welfare. If we adopt care as being central to ethics, we may be able to say that a theory of the right for feminist ethics would include the following. An action performed in some circumstance is right if and only if it is an action that a caring agent acting in character would perform in the circumstances at hand. Now, it's important to also look at objections to care ethics. In one situation, and in many situations, we may be able to say that not all instances of caring are morally good. For example, if we overpower others with our caring, we may end up stifling their development. The care ethicist will argue that genuine care doesn't stifle because it recognizes the genuine interest of others and acts accordingly. Now, in order for us to do this, we may have to utilize other virtues as well. Again, an appeal back to the idea of reciprocity of virtues. Another potential objection is that care may not be enough to ground morality. The care ethicist may argue that care as a virtue may fall under the reciprocity, as we mentioned, or that it may be a fundamental virtue, or simply a loose connecting principle for all the virtues.